said I'm Joe, I'll see him again. I ain't leaving here till I'm all the way around the bend. Since she gone, this single malt seemed to be my only friend. Said I'm Joe, I'll see him again. She did not leave a note, she did not call. What she did leave was me here with my back against the wall. Everything looks better through this fog of alcohol. I can see to the bottom of this glass, man, and that's all. Sit, Mama Joe, I have the same again. I ain't leaving here until I'm all the way around the bend. Ever since you gone.
Hallo, hallo, hallo. Ja. Zijn we live? Hello everyone. Welcome to the second iteration. Sorry for the delay. We had some technical issues with HDMI cables and stuff. But that's part of organizing a conference, I guess. My name is Fabian van Sluis. I'm the founder of Creative Coding Utrecht. We're a platform that supports digital creativity and creative coding as an artistic practice. And one of these important questions that we are exploring as an organization is actually, what is creative coding? Is it a movement? Is it a discipline? Is it something more than only creating beautiful images? I think this is a central question that I share with Vera van der Zijp, who is my co-curator and co-initiator of Iterations. Vera unfortunately isn't here. She is here though, online in the YouTube channel, moderating. And we're happy to welcome you all here at Vogelvrij in Utrecht, as well as online in our YouTube stream. So yes, this is a hybrid conference, and there are a few ground rules that we need to talk about. Basically, respect each other. You can ask questions, and we'll try to, I'll repeat the question as a moderator, so that if you have questions here in the room, the people online also know what you're asking. And at the same time, I try to also have a look at the YouTube question chat box for questions that appear from the people viewing online. So that's it. Before we start, I first have to thank a few people. Of course, the whole crew and the volunteers for helping setting this up. And of course, all the funds, the Creative Industry Fund, are the local municipality of Utrecht, who is supporting us to organize these things. So today we have a program with 3 speakers, Babusi Nyoni, Olivia Jack, and Tiga Brain. And for now I will quickly introduce our first speaker, which is Babusi Nyoni. He's a creative technologist, a DJ, and a co-founder of CEO Silla Health, a global social enterprise that helps people everywhere access healthcare on any mobile device through harnessing machine learning. Babusi uses emerging technology to develop sustainable solutions for communities in sub-Saharan Africa. He founded Silla Health after identifying an opportunity for artificial intelligence to fill the institutional voids created by poor healthcare systems in developing economies. Babusi has a strong passion for new ideas that will change the lives of those around him, and is a firm believer that African innovation will shape the technological zeitgeist worldwide. Give him a warm welcome.
Cool. Hi everyone, thanks for being super patient with us as we grappled with the cable. My name is Babusi, and I'm a creative technologist, a social entrepreneur, a music producer, DJ, multi-hyphenate, clearly. And today I'll be speaking specifically about one of the projects I have run, or should I say experiments I've run, as part of an outfit called Triple Black Agency, which is an innovation agency focused on creating work at the intersection, or I guess like nexus of emerging technology and the needs of underrepresented communities. And this is our most recent experiment, which is the African Metaverse Framework. We've worked on several other things, including a project called How to Tell a Her Story, which is in collaboration with a research lab called Effect Lab, based out of Amsterdam, that uses machine learning, specifically computer vision, to help migrant women tell stories from vernacular photography. We've also worked with computer vision to identify dance moves in sub-Saharan Africa, and later on turned that algorithm into a way to help diagnose Parkinson's disease, etc., etc., etc. But today we're here for the metaverse. First and foremost, how are we feeling today? We're feeling good? Good, okay. So the African Metaverse Framework. This was created in order to decentralize the metaverse to make it more accessible. And I guess before we even answer the question how we would build an alternative and inclusive metaverse, maybe a better question is why would we build one? And I was doing research for this talk, and I ran into this really interesting insight from Wonderman Thompson, which is an advertising agency group. And even in 2021, that's the weirdest way I've ever said 2021, but let's go. There was a report in which a lot of respondents felt they were not accurately represented online by way of avatars, and these were specifically respondents who were, I guess, in the global north characterized as minorities, typically underrepresented in tech. And this was interesting for me because I, of course, haven't been working in the metaverse for a very long time. So I thought at least by this point, representation would be something that they would have made great strides in. But even as recently as last year, there were still lapses in how people look versus how they're represented online, and the lack of customizability of their avatars. And this led me to wonder if I could possibly digitize myself and exist in a meta environment. And I looked for techniques which I could use that were freely available to, I guess, digitize myself. And I found an open sourced machine learning model that allows me to turn a 2D photo of myself into a 3D model. And I did that last year, Christmas time. And it was pretty fun. So I took this photo of myself. I grossly underestimated how tall I was versus how long the green screen should be. But of course, it still worked out fine. And I mapped my physical environment using an application called Polycam in order to create an environment where I could exist. And I built this cute little metaverse where my best friend and I were able to dance and party in perpetuity during Christmas, and everything was perfect. It's perfect except for the fact that it's not decentralized, right? It's still someone's metaverse, in this case mine. So I asked myself, how could we possibly then decentralize this concept of a metaverse? And in collaboration with the which is an Amsterdam-based, I would say, conversations facilitator organization, and Effect Lab, which is the research organization mentioned earlier, and Moo Hybrid Art House, based out of Eindhoven, we ran a series of workshops in which we enabled participants to convert themselves into 3D avatars the same way I had done, and also allow themselves to, I guess, rig and animate their avatars and be able to take part in whatever version of the metaverse they felt like participating in. So this is kind of what the workshops look like. We had 3 workshops, 2 in Amsterdam and 1 in Eindhoven. And we basically set up a place where people could take photos of themselves. And then, as you can see on the right, people were able to upload that onto freely available platforms where they could digitize themselves and turn themselves into avatars. And they were also able to animate themselves and add like movement, and this was all done within about a 1.5 hour session, which was pretty cool. A very low learning curve as well, so we had people from all ages, all walks of life participating and being able to follow how things were going, and this was pretty cool. And what we started asking ourselves then was, how can we effectively connect across realities? So a couple of slides back, you'll notice that in this little cutout, I'm not sure if you can see it clearly, but there's a little chat box over here. So I'd built a little chat interface that allowed myself and my best friend, and I guess if we invited anyone else into our special metaverse, to chat in real time. And that was the way that we were connecting. But when it comes to, I guess, like existing in a meta environment, there are different ways in which we can connect. And one of the ways that we were thinking about connecting for the purpose of this experiment in collaboration with the parties I mentioned was creating a dance party. So how can we all dance in the metaverse but also connect? And I started thinking about ways in which we could use dance as, I guess, like a language or a currency in the metaverse. And I was trying to figure out ways in which we could do that. And then it hit me that a couple of years ago, one of the experiments that we ran that I mentioned a little early on, called the For Sure Dance app, which used computer vision in a mobile phone browser to allow people with, I guess, like entry-level smartphones to rate this very, not really sophisticated, but really taxing dance move that originated in South Africa called the Vorsho, using pose estimation, which is basically a machine learning way to estimate certain points in your body in real time without the need for sensors or like special markers. And this was pretty successful in the sense that the uptake for people using this specific technology, which was very new at the time, on very low-end devices was very high. So we learned that with context came a lot of, what is the word I'm looking for? Not necessarily uptake, but adoption. So as long as there was like cultural context on why the technology needed to be used, the technology actually ceased to be important, and it was more how people achieve what they'd like to achieve on the platform. In this case, it was a dance app. And with that insight, we started thinking about more effective ways in which we could use this algorithm that can measure dance, or I guess like movement over time. And we, in our research, discovered that the diagnosis of Parkinson's disease relies in part on symptomatic observation over time of movement, such as one's posture and their gait. And these were things that we were able to parameterize in our app. So we went to Zimbabwe and did a couple of research interviews and did some field tests in like different lighting conditions. And we created this world first app for assisting in the diagnosis of Parkinson's disease using computer vision. Cool. What does this have to do with the metaverse? Give me a second. So one of the ways that we assisted caregivers to measure data empirically on the app was to also allow them to measure hand tremors, which is another symptom of Parkinson's disease. And so they were able to place the app in an applicant's hand and measure the severity of their tremors, so like how much their hand shakes. And then I realized that we could use that same algorithm to measure how much someone is moving their phone, which, you know, if you are dancing, you could actually be moving. So what this actually looked like was this amazing hybrid experience that was conducted at the Moo Hybrid Art House in Eindhoven, where people were connecting on their mobile phones and not texting and like chatting, but more connecting through dance. Their movements were being measured in real time, and those little green bubbles you see at the top were a way to let people in the space know if they were dancing in rhythm with someone else in the space, because we were also measuring the rhythm in the context of everyone present and also in the context of the music that was playing. This was pretty cool. So what did we learn? We learned, as you can see from that video, that the metaverse is a mirror, but this heavily depends on how you decide to portray spaces and people, and even from, I guess, like a production level, how you decide to portray the metaverse itself. So if we had, for example, placed the metaverse, if we placed the screen like somewhere over there and had the dance party over here, people would likely just dance amongst each other. But the presentation of the experience itself in the way that we had done it, where we had this giant projection and people seeing an almost life-size version of their virtual selves dancing in sync with them kind of look like a ballerina like mirror where, you know, people see how well they're dancing. And we also learned that that like for like translation of what a person looks like in real life versus what they look like in the metaverse also increase their connection and increase their responsibility to their metaverse character. And the second thing that we learned is that participation makes the party. So this sentence doesn't really make sense. I just really liked the way you say it. Participation makes the party. But what I wanted to drive home with this is that we learned that by people engaging in the way that they did in the metaverse, by seeing their avatar dance and connect with other people, it increased their desire to stay in the metaverse. We had designed that session to last about 15 to 20, 30 minutes, like maximum. But then what happened was that by connecting with people and by, I guess, creating some kind of social capital in the way that people were engaging and connecting with each other through dance, this went on for close to an hour. And it was pretty jarring, actually, because we hadn't anticipated that people would want to spend that long in an environment that is, you know, not tactile, considering they had other people around them. Yeah, that was a pretty interesting learning point. And then the third and last insight that we gleaned was that hybridity could very well equal humanity in the meta space, and hybridity in this sense being how much we connect the real world experiences and the ways that we connect amongst each other from an interpersonal level to what it means to connect online. So using dance as a language, for example, was one way that we were able to start to break that barrier between the real and the virtual and start to kind of merge the ways in which we would typically connect as humans. You know, you don't need to be checking your phone, you don't need to be texting to like connect with someone. You could easily have this whole language of exchanging ideas and possibly even making connections purely via the way that you are moving. And I think there are more opportunities in which we can replicate the ways that people will interact in real life in, I guess, like meta environments, or maybe even more accurately say metaverse environments, because the actual name itself is not necessarily tied to a single company. And yeah, that experiment was part of a broader project by Mu Hybrid Art House, the and Affect Lab called The Toolkit for the In-Between, and it interrogates and explores the ways in which people can connect in experiences that I guess start to blur the boundaries between the online and the offline, and also critique the ways in which we connect, and for example use language such as dance as a way in which we can, I guess, be. Thank you so much. My name is Babu Signoni again, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your iterations. Thank you. Okay, we're just going to do a bit of questions right now.
So, are there already any questions here in the room? Hey?
I think there's like another one, but I'm not sure if it's working.
Thank you so much for your
Cool.
really interesting talk. I really like this. Even though I think you talked a little bit about it, the whole concept of metaverse, the definition of the words.
Yeah.
It's, I think, for many people still pretty vague, and it's really
True.
being claimed, of course, by Facebook.
Yes.
So, for you, if you would explain the concept of a metaverse in your own terms to somebody who doesn't know anything about digital technology, how would you define it?
Yeah, my apologies for that oversight. Yes. So the metaverse, the way that I understand it, has been around for a very long time. The phrase itself was coined a very long time ago. I'm not entirely sure of the exact date, but it definitely predates the introduction of the same concept by the company formerly known as Facebook. And my understanding of it is a virtual environment that either replicates, extends, or I guess like presents an entirely new notion of existence. Basically that, right? So it's how we can exist. I think maybe the most important aspect of that is exist as representations of ourselves. So we are in some form of metaverse in more like linear platforms like social media. You know, we do have like avatars or representations in some sense, but I think the metaverse is a more like concerted way in which we exist on platforms that we have imbued with our own likeness. So something like Minecraft, something like Fortnite is a metaverse. I think it's basically the idea of existing either as an extension or as a reflection of yourself in the online.
Thank you.
Cool.
Thank you. Somebody else has a question here? No? So. Okay, yeah. I'll ask another question.
All right.
So you were speaking about dance as a language and a currency very suitable for the metaverse. Could you elaborate a bit more on yeah?
Yeah. So what we wanted to have was a dance party, like a real people dance party, but that also allowed people online to connect. And we were thinking of ways in which people could connect. So if we're having a party in Eindhoven, someone's joining in from New York or from Amsterdam via their computer, what is the way in which that they can participate in that party without feeling as if their remoteness is a liability? So a way in which we were able to do that was to use, I guess, like dance in the way that we were able to measure it as a way to, I guess, one, translate someone's physical existence into their like online like persona or presence. So your dance was directly tethered to your avatar's dance. So that was one way in which we were able to transport people in that sense. Then the second way was that we were able to build an interaction based on people who were dancing in a similar way. And I think that was like the most important piece, because it allowed people then who were connecting very remotely in a way that they felt was isolated from other people to start to make connections with other people who were apparently dancing at the same rhythm, you know, which if they were all in the physical environment, that would have been, I guess, an even more heightened experience. So using, I guess, dance as the lingua franca was the way in which we were able to foster those connections in a way that doesn't, you know, take people out of the experience of dancing and more just like leverage it and actually make it even more enhanced.
Could you explain also a bit more about who was actually participating? Who
Cool.
was the group?
Yes, good question. So this was the event that I showed the video of was an event that we ran during Dutch Design Week. So there were a lot of people who were, I guess, like in the festival like circuit who signed up for it. I think we had a couple of students from some schools. I think in Amsterdam there were some people at from Rijks Academy who joined in the workshop. It was a mixed bag mostly, really, yeah. But for the actual event, we had a lot of people joining in from the Dutch Design Week who just came to either join as guests or had initially participated in the workshop. Yeah.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, well, I was asking because I was also wondering, you were saying like you believe in the African innovation
Yes.
strength, and I was wondering if they were actually participating.
Exactly. Yeah, so this has been like one of the most, I guess, like different experiments for me, because typically when I build something for a specific audience, I get to like use it there first. So maybe to like further unpack my practice. So what I typically do is when I build new things, I build them specifically for people in the global south. So with their with their conditions as a baseline for my research and user-centered design. So with this metaverse framework, there were considerations made for device access, for example. So a lot of meta platforms or ideas of the metaverse even today kind of revolve around a device that must be worn on the head or something. But then I think to build on the notion of the metaverse in a way that is already so economically like divisive makes people who don't have that kind of economic access already feel left out of this like zeitgeist. And I think it's important that as this conversation is being had in places that have more economic access, those that have less feel they can still participate without access to like an Oculus Quest or something. So that was one consideration. Then the second thing was the representation factor. So for a lot of people who were participating in the laptop, it was kind of jarring to create an avatar that looks exactly like them, because for a lot of people who were part of the workshop, that online representation is something that they actually would rather not have. People prefer to be, I don't know, like dinosaurs or unicorns or something, because there wasn't really any novelty in existing exactly the way that they are presented. Because I mean, like, let's face it, like they've been, presented and represented in these online spaces for the longest time. So the conversation of representation where it's being had right now in this metaverse framework is one for people who have never had that representation before. And finally, there are techniques that allow them to look exactly the way they look in real life in the online, because avatar customizability is still not geared towards people from places that are not in the global north. So that was the second thing. So it's been interesting to, I guess, like present the work and have the workshops in a place that is completely stripped of the social conditions that were present in the research, and also even yet not have had an event yet in Africa where this was made for, which is not typical for my experiments, but it's also interesting to like just put it straight from the research pipeline to the practice and see how people are taking it.
So have you already planned an event to?
Yes, I have. So what we're working on right now is opening up the platform to allow people to asynchronously run their own events. So we had a workshop earlier on today and a little dance party, which was pretty cool. So what we're looking at doing now is making sure that people can, like run that whole human digitization experience on their own, which they can based on the instructions that we've set up, but then also be able to have their own party, so upload their own music. So there's different types of users. I forgot to mention, so there's a DJ type user who plays music, and that music syncs on every device that is tuned into the metaverse, so everyone's really like dancing to the same song. So we're creating a toolkit that will allow people to use this without the need for my involvement, and I think that's the way in which it can finally go to the places where it was initially created for.
Nice. I got another question here from Vera.
Yeah.
Babusi, you were at Iterations last year, and we invited you again because you very rapidly use a new technology in your work. How did you experience that switch?
The switch between the work...
Probably machine learning and metaverse.
Oh, yeah, so for me, it's... I think maybe I've worked with machine learning for quite a period, but it's not, I wouldn't say it's my forte. My forte is really emerging technology. So my strength is actually understanding new tech the moment it comes out and finding use cases for it, typically in the context of the global south. So the switch for me, I think it might be like jarring for someone else, but then for me it's just it's like a weekend or something and then it's done. Yeah.
Are there any more questions here in the room? Didn't get it.
I just have a small question about the movement of the hand.
Yeah.
Is making the avatar dance.
Yes.
in a way.
Yes.
How about feet?
Yeah, we actually had a participant who...
So sorry to repeat the question. We were looking at the movement of hands in the experiment, and Maria asks about the feet.
Yeah, so that's a really good question. We actually had a participant who strapped, like those straps that you use when you're running. She strapped the phone onto her ankle. It's on a separate presentation, and she was using that to control. So it's just movement really in general, and I think people typically would put it in their hands because I guess like that's. If you're not trying to move too much, you can just move your hands. But if you're really, and I'm guessing you're like a party animal, you can just like move your feet, and that could be what you use to control. Yeah.
I have a question about privacy.
Yeah.
And I totally dig the idea of representation in the metaverse or metaverses and the possibilities that they should be there to represent yourself as you are. But the privacy issue for me, for example, would be still important because in a digital medium, of course, maybe I don't want to be the same kind
Exactly.
of person.
Yeah.
Right? Maybe shorten.
So the question is about privacy versus representation and being independent of your representation online.
Yeah, so I think that's a good conversation. I'll answer it in two parts. So I think definitely having that likeness representation of yourself is, it's, I guess, it allows you to be identifiable, which for a lot of people is not the most ideal. So I think the setting in which this metaverse framework specifically is meant to exist in is almost similar to like a Zoom meeting or something where you're comfortable sharing your identity with someone, but at the same time you could also we do have avatars that are not. So I'm not sure if you can see. Oh, sorry, my screen's not sharing. But we did have avatars that are not directly representative of people. So you could just scan a QR code and type a random name or like your name if you prefer and have an avatar that doesn't look like you. But that was something that we'd done initially for guests, but also found that some people who already had their own avatars just wanted to come on board as a rabbit or something. I think an important thing to maybe consider is like the context in which this would exist. So it might be like a party between friends or something. So it's not necessarily a platform it's not a platform that you would have an event with a bunch of strangers that were not aware of what was happening. But I think we do have like a fallback, as I just described, for people who don't want to look the way that they do. And even if they do look the way that they do, they can also change their names as well if they prefer to do that. And then the second part, and of course, I always do this. I'm like, I'm going to answer in two parts, and I forget the second part. The second part was, I think it's the storage of information as well. So we don't store any information. We also like don't, even from like a research perspective, it's bad, but then from a privacy perspective, it's really good. We don't even store like session information on like how many people participated, who was online, who was offline. So like trying to put like those checks in place as we, I guess, like build something out that involves, the participation of other people as we, also figure out what it means to exist online as well, is something that's of prime importance to us. I remember the second thing. So cool. So when I built the first version of the metaverse, I invited my best friend. So it's not necessarily answering your question, but it gives you another question as well. So built that, and I had the option in choosing dance moves to find a dance move that like best matched him. And I purposefully chose the dance move that was slightly more active than he typically would be in a party. And I shared with him the link, like, oh, look, bestie, you're in the metaverse. Like, wow, so cool, bro. And then after 2 weeks, I asked him how he felt about the whole experience. And he was, of course, like really happy to have been represented online and, to be like the first guest in my metaverse. And then I asked him, so how did you feel about your dance? And he goes, yeah, I wouldn't really dance like that. And I said, oh, okay, so how would that make you feel? And he said, yeah, I don't know, it was kind of weird, man. And I said, okay, good. Because the thing I wanted to explore there was that agency, right? So apart from conversations around, existing and your likeness and the data stored, is also the idea that your likeness on a platform owned by someone else is also, I guess, like stripped of some kind of agency. You kind of can only control as much as you're allowed to control. And that sparked a really interesting conversation around, I guess, like ownership in a sense. So not an answer, it's a whole other question. Okay, good.
So I'll round off with one final question. So Babusi, you're also a DJ, and I was interested to learn how basically this experiment, does it also influence your performance as a DJ, or do you get inspired by blending these things?
Yeah, so I haven't done it yet, but I was really intrigued by the way we were able to use dance and translate that to something else, and I think there could be something in there in a way that would enrich a performance. Maybe I think the use of like movement and like measuring that in a way, and giving people control over, I don't know, something, an audiovisual experience or something, and putting that in the hands or like legs of people who are sending their like movement data could be very interesting. But I haven't done anything yet. But I think it's an interesting way to heighten experiences.
Cool.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot.
Cool.
Thanks for your presentation. We'll now have a short break of 10 minutes. We'll make a switch and then we'll continue.
Cool. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, but it's getting
Yeah, so
dark
I-
already. It's terrible.
Yeah, I lived in Berlin. Hello, hello. 1, 2, 3. Test. Okay, Jacob, I'm switching to this. Yeah. Great. I'm gonna ask for the punchline, Jacob.
Okay, we're going to continue with our next speaker. As you know, CCU has been promoting live coding for the last couple of years. And when organizing live coding events, you generally have two platforms that dominate. On the one hand, you have Tidal doing music, and on the other, there's Hydra that is responsible for the visuals. And today we have invited Olivia Jack, the developer of Hydra, as our next speaker. She'll be here online. I don't know if she's, maybe you can put her on. Yeah, there she is. Hello, Olivia. So Olivia is a programmer and an artist who works frequently with open source software, cartography, live coding, and experimental interfaces. She's the developer, as said, of browser-based creative tool Hydra, PixelSynth, and LiveLab. And today she'll dive into those projects. Are you ready? Okay, let's go.
Yes, I'm ready. Thank you. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you so much for having me here. I am a programmer and an artist, and for the last 5 years now, one of my projects has been working on a tool/set of experiments called Hydra. I actually also do other things outside of Hydra, but I often forget that, and whenever I am asked to speak, I seem only able to talk about Hydra. But I think over the years, Hydra has also morphed into many other things as well. Please let me know if you can't hear me or something. I'm like speaking into a black box right now, so I can't fully tell that everything is working. But anyways.
We're all good.
Great. So a little bit about Hydra. I'm going to talk just a little bit about kind of how it started and the inspiration for it, and then also what we've been working on lately with the project, which is more kind of how a software project has become this community of people, and what that has meant for the project as it grows. So Hydra is a browser-based video synth and live coding environment that started as a set of just personal explorations and things that I was exploring. And especially for me, it started as a bit of an obsession with a specific API. So what you see right now is a screenshot of the developer documentation, or kind of spell book for programmers for an API called WebRTC, which runs in the browser. And so WebRTC is a real-time communication API. And again, this is just the documentation that programmers or other people who want to make things on in JavaScript and on the web would look at to see how to do that. And so anyways, WebRTC lets you stream video, audio, and data between different connected browser windows and different people connected to a website. And so it's actually what is being used right now through Jitsi, so you can see my screen. But it's also this kind of experimental thing that runs in the browser that anyone can play around with if they want to. And so this is like back in 2014, I just started playing around with the camera and writing shaders to filter the camera in the browser. And already I was kind of just interested in making things where here there's two controls, basically the X and Y position of the mouse control some parameter of each filter that you can see. And as I got a bit more into exploring kind of video on the web and what does it mean to have video on the web, I also started becoming interested in collaboration as well, and how the fact that you can share video and audio between people opens the door to a kind of more collaborative process for learning how to code or trying to code. And so this was in 2016, I gave a workshop in Medellin, Colombia, at a space called Platoedro. And it was an intro to coding workshop with P5.js. But what I wanted was that as soon as people started to code, that it was immediately kind of a social process. And so everyone was sharing something with the other people at the table. And of course, you still see this a lot of times if we're at a coding workshop, it's like each person in front of their computer, and everyone's just in front of their computer, and it's kind of hard to interact with each other. And so I thought I wrote a little add-on for P5 to share basically the output of the person's canvas with the other people around the circle. And it turned out this was kind of a terrible idea for a beginner workshop. Like nobody could, it was just too much information to try to do in one time. Like learn how to write what is a function, write a few lines of code, and then now immediately share it with other people was kind of too much. But I was still interested in sort of this idea, and with WebRTC that you can send things between different computers. And so I was also, I kind of had this idea of like, oh, I want to send video around the internet, but it's kind of like, what happens? So you start sending video, and then what do you do with the video once you're kind of bouncing it around between different browsers? And in that context, I became inspired by this kind of modular video synthesizers, especially from the 70s and 80s. This one that you see here is the Sand and Image processor that was built in 1971. And what you see here are these little boxes that are connected to each other. And basically each of these boxes either generates a signal in time, that's voltage is changing in time, or it modifies a signal. And then when that signal gets to the screen and it's read across horizontally and vertically, it generates a pattern in time. Or if this we were talking about audio, which is basically the same concept of a modular synth, it generates a kind of vibrations in time, and that generates an audio signal. And so when thinking about, oh, what are things, like how to sort of just even wrap my head around what could be interesting to try with video on the internet and sending video around, found this kind of idea of pack together, basically. Modular synthesizer somehow kind of related to this idea of the internet as like patching things together. And so having these two kind of ideas in mind, and just, I guess a lot of my practice as an artist is just trying things out and seeing what happens. Necessarily a specific direction, but more trying something out and seeing what happens and trying something else out. And so this was actually one of the earliest experiments I did with just sending video between different browser windows. And here, all of the windows are on the same screen, but this would work the same way if each browser window was on different computers in different parts of the world, because that's kind of the magic of this WebRTC protocol, is that you could stream things between different client browser windows. And so anyways, I was just interested in exploring this idea, and basically generating a video here, generating another visual here, and then sending both of those video streams to the one on the right. I'm not sure actually if my mouse is coming through, but so sending the two top left videos to the one on the right, and then compositing them in a certain way, and then using the camera on the bottom and combining that with the output of the other videos. And at this stage, I wasn't sure kind of oh, oops. What happened there? let me go back. Yeah, I didn't have a sort of specific goal in mind for what I was doing this. And as I was exploring these things, I opened the browser console and just started changing parameters of what was happening in the video by writing code into the browser console. And the browser console is kind of something that's part of almost every browser that's made to sort of help developers. But it turns out you can also just live code. So when you're on any website, you can write code into the console, and then that changes what happens on the screen. Or yeah, you could use it to debug something or whatever. And so as I was exploring these ideas, instead of writing sort of a fixed program that does one thing, or maybe does 3 things, and I can switch between the 3 things, as I was exploring these ideas about video and the internet and everything else, and collaboration and everything, I wrote the libraries in a way where I could directly code from the browser in order to have a more immediate way to explore these ideas that I had. And I've been a programmer for a long time, since about 2008 or something. But I'm only in the last like 5 years or so did I kind of become aware of this practice called live coding, which is where people write code live, usually to create an audio-visual performance. And Fabian mentioned other languages like tidal cycles, and there's a lot of languages that people make specifically designed to enable this kind of performance. But when I first got into it, I wasn't so, I don't know why it keeps happening. I wasn't so interested in performing so much as just exploring this idea. It was more like artistic investigation or something like that. But the paradigm of writing code not in a way where it's going to do a defined thing and this is the function and now it's working, but writing code to enable this sort of dialogue where I can keep trying things out was really exciting to me, and was a bit of a paradigm shift from how I had understood programming up until that point. And so then I kind of made a more packaged or formalized version of these experiments, and had to give it a name as people started using it more. And that became this tool called Hydra. And it's a live codable, let me read what it says here. Hydra is a live codable, there's a typo, live codable video synth encoding environment that runs directly in the browser. It is free and open source and made for beginners and experts alike. And so to get started, we can close this window, change some numbers. So maybe I'll change this color number over here and see what happens. Change some numbers and see the results on the screen. And so here you see some kind of trippy visuals, and then some text, which is computer code, and this computer code is generating the visuals that you see behind it. And yeah, this all runs in the browser. The URL is, I will type here. I'll make it, let's see if we can. Oh, the URL is that, and it works on phones also. And so hydra.project.xyz. And here, this like kind of shuffle button, you can shuffle between different sketches that other people have made. There might be some flashing in this, just as a warning. I will try to minimize it, but it's possible that there will be some flashy images in this. So I guess Hydra it still has this kind of WebRTC functionality where you can send whatever you're doing to other people. But overall, it's very inspired by modular video synthesis and this idea of kind of connecting different pieces together in order to generate the final output that you see on the screen. And so I'm just going to show a tiny bit of Hydra code for people who haven't seen it before. And so I'm going to clear what's on the screen. And so one of the basic sort of units in Hydra is an oscillator. And so if I just type OSC on the screen, that's the code for creating this oscillator. And so if I type OSC and I run Control-Shift-Enter, nothing actually happens. And that's because I've kind of said, create one of these oscillator things, but I haven't actually connected it to the output yet, or connected it to the screen, as it were, if you can kind of picture that modular synth we were looking at earlier. And so in order to actually connect it, I have to do this .out function. So now when I do Control-Shift-Enter, you can see the oscillator. And so then I have sort of parameters of the oscillator that I could change. Like this, I could change the frequency, or kind of the number of strikes. I can change the direction and the speed of it. And I can also, I'm gonna actually make frequency a little higher. Let's see. Oop. And I can also change the color separation, so how much the different colors are separated. And so this is like one module of the modular synth, and then these parameters in here are like changing knobs of what can happen with the modular synth. And then here I can start adding some different transformations. So like this. Now I'm adding a rotation to the oscillator. I could add a kaleidoscope. I always do this specific chain of functions as when I'm introducing Hydra. I'm not really sure why, but there we go. Could repeat the kaleidoscope. And so they're kind of simple words or simple concepts of like, I'm rotating it, now I'm repeating it. But very quickly you can get to kind of complex things. Yeah, and another piece of Hydra is that you can use lots of different sources as inputs. So you can use a webcam, you can use a screen capture, you can use a canvas, you can use a live stream of someone else's visuals, you can use a video. I know I'm forgetting things. But you basically you can use lots of different things as kind of the source that's coming into here. And then you can also multiple simultaneous things happen at once and like route them into each other. And then you get this kind of feedbacky thing. But I think something I think there's something about this kind of like internet collaborative thing and this modular idea of interconnectedness that I've been interested in the ways that Hydra as a project can connect with other things. And so kind of the more ways you can output different things into it, or input different things into it, the more it's kind of like a piece in an interconnected web of like visuals, but also maybe creative practices and other things. Yeah, and so this is Hydra. You can also, I always really like showing the camera here, so if I want to show the camera, I can just type initcam, and then I can do this. I created this source called S0, where the camera exists. Oh, I guess I have a weird OBS webcam. And now you can see my, my same webcam inside Hydra. And just like we were doing with the oscillator, I could start to apply some effects here. So I added a color. I could start either kaleidoscope, all this thing. And something also that exists in the editor is that you can immediately sort of share what you're doing. And so if I click here, I'm gonna try sharing. I guess you don't see the pop-up window, but it's asking me to include the name or Twitter handle. And so I'm gonna share this. And then basically, this was kind of the quickest way to make a little gallery, at least when I was trying to make it easier for people to share what they made. So the gallery is a Twitter bot. You can see here, and so we'll see. So now we see the sketch that I just made. And we can also see sketches that other people made in Hydra. And I actually also, I most became motivated to make this gallery because once Hydra was online, lots of people in lots of different places started using it, and I realized I saw people using it in ways that I had never imagined for myself, and I learned a lot just from seeing how they might use the tool. So for example, if we go to this sketch here that someone made, what we can do is just actually click on the link, and what it does is directly open that sketch in the browser. Oops, that's Flash. Let's see if there's another one. We could try this one here. So what happens when you open a sketch is you can directly then open the sketch in the editor and edit it also. So let's say I edit this, and then if I share it again, I'm sharing it again now, and go back to the Twitter, what it should. So it shows my sketch that I just made, but it also shows that it was based on this previous sketch that someone else made. And so I guess a goal with this is to kind of enable this sort of asynchronous collaboration where people could be inspired by each other and build off of what other people are doing. Yeah, and I think that's been a big goal for me the longer I've worked on Hydra, I've seen the ways in which it has enabled kind of inner connection and interaction between different people online who just get interested in it for different reasons. And I think, yeah, I've been interested in how the software itself can kind of foster that in different ways. For example, when you load the editor, you immediately see a sketch that someone else made rather than kind of a blank canvas. It's this idea of like, oh, there's lots of people making things, and that, yeah, each time you get a different sort of example. And more recently, with Flor de Fuego, who's been a very active contributor to Hydra project, we've been working on this kind of Hydra Internet Garden, ever-growing community database of resources, projects, tutorials, and code related to Hydra videos. And it has been this, after seeing just all the different ways that people use it, is creating sort of a place to show that and share that. Like someone made some extra shaders that you can add into Hydra. Or yeah, there's all sorts of things here. And that's been a little bit, I think when I first put this project online, it's not the first open source project that I've made or initiated, but it is the first open source project I've created that has like lots and lots of users, and people started kind of submitting pull requests and wanting to change things. And at first I felt as a good open source person that I like needed to incorporate everybody's changes and stuff. And over time I've actually learned that I like having a lot of creative control over a small piece. And instead of kind of wanting to have a lot of people working on the source code or a lot of people working on the core piece of Hydra, is to try to make it as easy as possible to integrate it with Hydra with other things. And so it's again, maybe this modular idea, but not in a visual way, but like you can load any other external script directly into the editor because it's just JavaScript anyways. And so that has made it that people can write their own extensions to connect Hydra with lots of different things. It is open source, so it runs, you can, fork it and do what you want with it, but then it's also its own library that can be used just inside of a web page on its own. And so part of it is to, think of the ways that people can use this kind of inside of their own creative projects, and rather than have, like hundreds of people contributing to the project. But that's sort of a work in progress. I think it's partly also that I like writing code more than I like kind of leading a project or managing something. So it's interesting to see how I can kind of go in that direction. Another thing that, so another kind of more recent project with Hydra, let me go back to the editor. Another more recent project is also improving the documentation. So this is this interactive documentation of everything. Also translating the editor into a lot of different languages. And then something I'm especially excited about that started recently along with Antonio Roberts, who's a longtime live coder based in the UK, is this grant program. And this is just going along with this idea of, instead of having kind of centralized decision making about what should happen with the project, is how to support kind of other people in their other ideas of things that they might want to do, kind of related to Hydra, related to live coding. And so here you can see a Hydra background, of course, and then this the grant program, and it's all I don't get paid for making Hydra, but we have this open collective fund, and so anyone can donate to the project, and the idea is that half of those donations go to development, but then half goes to the grant. And so actually the project, and because I don't view the main development of the project as technical development per se, but as kind of all these different things that people end up doing with Hydra. And so just I guess I'm getting close to the end of this time slot. But one of the fun things that I have been playing around with also with this kind of collective funding model is website here called Unique Magical Browser Objects. And so what happens on Unique Magical Browser Objects is that anytime someone donates to the Hydra community fund that funds the project, it generates a unique magical browser object or a unique sketch and gives the code of that sketch here. And so you can see different sketches. It definitely has bugs, so if you go try it right now, let me know, because I think, yeah, it should work, but yeah, and yeah, here it talks a little bit about the unique magical browser objects. Yeah, I think maybe I will end here and leave space for questions. This is a lot about Hydra. I think, yeah, what I didn't talk so much about is kind of my own artistic practice with this, which is partly, I think, just creating Hydra, but also a lot I've been exploring lately is more experimental music performance and using visuals to generate, creating performance systems for myself, especially combining drawing to generate sound and stuff like that. Yeah, so thank you so much for having me. And I guess we can open it now to questions.
Thank you, Olivia. That was great. Does anyone have any urgent questions here in the room? No? So I have one. Olivia, I'm super impressed by seeing the effort you took in creating the platform, working on documentation and also the support and the funding to foster the community, so to say. Could you explain what other activities you do to nurture the community further?
I'm sorry, it cut out for a sec at the end. Could you repeat the last part?
So what are you doing to grow and foster the community?
We also host meetups every once in a while. And there's a forum and stuff like that. And the meetup has ended. Here's a website from one of the last meetups, but we ended up with this kind of interesting format where everybody does a show and tell at the meetup, and then there's some longer talks. And so that's been, I think, really important in fostering the community as well. But yeah, a big thing for me is also just kind of trying something out and seeing what happens and going from there. I don't have such an overarching vision, this is what I would want in 10 years or something like that.
I think also...
I think with Hydra and then with live coding in general, a big part of the experience is often workshops, I've found. And there is something kind of inherently social about often in live coding performances, people share their code and the code becomes this social dialogue. And so if you see live coding performance, you could also possibly implement what the code that you see someone else using, you could implement it yourself. But a big kind of part of this community is also workshops and kind of sharing things. And sometimes I feel the most excited about workshop contexts in my life.
Cool, thanks. 2 more questions. Wait, I forgot the one. Oh yeah, I wanted to say, if everybody hasn't seen a live coding performance, this Saturday we'll be organizing an Algorave here. Floor, who's been mentioned by Olivia, will be performing as well as a few other people that also use Hydra. So if you want to see it live, join us on Saturday. That's it for the promotion part of our event. Now another question. Could you, Olivia, could you explain a bit more about your own practice? Also, yeah, how has your own performance with Hydra developed over the years, changed, been influenced by others?
Yeah, I think I never made Hydra thinking that I would perform with it or something, but it turned out that before making Hydra, I did work on media for theater and stuff, but I was always very behind the scenes and never imagined that I would want to kind of be in front of people and stuff. And I think I've just surprised myself with how much I like performing. Maybe I will share a quick little video if it works. Let's see. Yeah, I will share one here. In 2019, I got to use Hydra in a planetarium in Bogota. And so what you'll see is actually my browser window stretched, projected in the whole planetarium. And until this point, I kind of viewed Hydra as this like little tool, but it's fun, it's in the browser, and not necessarily as like professional thing. I'm not sure if you get the sound, but hopefully you do. But that's actually my cursor up there that you see in the planetarium.
Yeah. Unfortunately, we don't hear the sound with this video.
Oh no! Okay, I'll send a link. I didn't realize that. Okay. Okay, so there was no sound. Anyways, it's a lot better with the sound. I will say that. Yeah, but I guess personally, I really like creating kind of performance systems where even though I know I built it and I know what the lines of code do, I like exploring when I don't quite know what will happen, and I find it kind of the most fun and the most kind of exciting is when there's like certain things that I have control of and certain things that I don't have control of. And yeah, it makes maybe the computer feel a bit more like a collaborator in a sense. And I also like kind of, oh wait, I'll show. Let's see if this one works. Yeah, I like just exploring different experiments. This is a sort of experiment making a drawing editor and a code editor together, and just kind of like hodgepodging different things on the screen. And yeah, I like this kind of, I think this immediacy of being able to code and do things both performatively and just when I'm working on stuff as a kind of creative workflow. Yeah, and I have some others with sound where basically the different visual aspects of either a drawing or kind of the pixel colors are translated into sound. But I won't share that as the sound isn't working. But I can share some links later. But yeah, I like kind of putting these different things in dialogue with each other. And I really, lately especially, I really like in performances kind of starting from very simple things and making it so the audience can sort of follow along, at least with a lot of what's happening.
Okay, we got a few remarks and questions from the people online. One of which is more algorithms in planetariums. But a few questions came up, and this is, why is it called Hydra? Could you elaborate a bit more on, like, the idea, the concept?
Yeah, that's a good question. I actually am not sure. I gave a workshop where I had, actually at the ICLC in Mexico City, which is the International Conference on Live Coding. I mentioned that because it's coming up next year in the Netherlands, and so that was I proposed this idea of live coding live streams, and it was accepted. And then I was like, oh no, I have to actually make what I said exists in the proposal that I sent for the workshop. And so the more formal version of Hydra was made in order to give a workshop at ICLC, but it did not have a name at that point. It was just this like sandbox coding environment for trying things out. And then after, I want to keep using this. And so for some reason, the name Hydra had been floating around. I think there's some idea of like no starting and end point and sort of multiplicity. Like Hydra is this mythical creature with many heads, and also is a one-celled organism where if like one leg comes off, more ones sprout. And so I think there was something like that floating around. Since then, it was not a smart name to pick, because now there is a Hydra synth that came out a few months later that's an audio synth, and now there's like other things called Hydra where I am now in Berlin, and it's like, it's too common of a name, unfortunately. So now I try to use Hydra video synth more.
Yeah. Thanks. One other question that came online is, do you think browser apps are going to replace softwares for creative means?
Yeah, I actually do, especially with kind of like more and more browsers can have ask permission to access different things, and there used to be a lot of differences in performance between and in kind of permissions between browser things and native applications, but actually now all of that is really changing. Even the browser can access a local file system if you give it permission. And for graphics, most of Hydra is made in WebGL, which has almost very few performance differences from OpenGL. And I think also just amount of the world that uses phones rather than computers, and the accessibility of just opening something. And now you can basically make a browser app that someone can sort of download and that works offline, which is also on the to-do list for Hydra. But yeah, I do think it is a very kind of powerful, interconnected way of distributing and sharing things that is like very accessible compared to other ways of installing software.
Thanks. Yeah, I think we are also organizing a lot of workshops. Indeed, having a web-based platform that helps a lot with kickstarting people and helping them. One of the questions is also like, what kind of steps did you take to make the platform more accessible? So maybe also reflecting a bit on the interface, code. How did you make it intuitive?
I think I'm trying to remember. There's definitely been things, but it's not necessarily accessible in ways that web accessibility is normally defined, where often you need like text versions of everything that happens. And I think that isn't a realistic goal for something like Hydra. But I think there's a lot of accessibility in terms of kind of the ways that the language is built and the immediacy of like it's hard to have an error, for example, and there's any number works, and I think a lot of the accessibility was in sort of the language design of like you don't have to initialize variables, but rather there's this immediacy of what you see is what you get. Yeah, but I'm always interested, like there have been, a few people have given talks about, for example, neurodiversity and live coding and Hydra, and I'm not an expert, but I also try to listen and be open to other people's ideas, and then also this idea that people can make different things based on it maybe helps with accessibility in different ways.
Building up on what you just said, like people doing research into your platform, what is the most significant or surprising use of Hydra that surprised you by others?
One that's been really exciting to me lately, actually at our most recent meetup, Karen Palacios gave a talk about her practice using Hydra. And she is a member, a sort of permanent member of a folkloric music band in Argentina that has a huge kind of audience and following. And at every performance, she uses Hydra, and you can see the code in these kind of music events with thousands and thousands of people, and in a kind of very traditional or pretty traditional music context, not so much this experimental music, algo-ravey context. And so she actually, my understanding is that her sort of job is visuals live coder as part of this band. And so that could be a sort of job, it is really like mind-blowing to me. And I think the talk is actually finally online. And so, I definitely recommend seeing this talk. Yeah, all the meetups that we have, we put all the talks online. Oh yeah, I think I found the link here. Yeah, I don't know where I could share this, but maybe if I share it here in the chat, someone can share it in the YouTube. Maybe that's the best thing to do.
Yeah.
Here, I will.
Thanks.
I will
If you share it, we'll share it further. Okay, Olivia, I think we have to wrap up for now. Thanks a lot for your work. Also from the online community, much respect. Yeah, and I hope, yeah, the ICLC, you mentioned the ICLC. This will actually take place here in April, so hopefully we'll see you here live. But thank you. Give her applause.
Thank you so much.
Thanks. So now we'll have another 15-minute break, and we'll prepare for the last speaker of today. Thanks.
you hear me, and now do you hear the audio? Why is that? If I plug the headphones in, the computer audio goes away.
Yeah, it could be. Yeah, I think it's probably because Jitsi can only take one audio source.
And we're back. We're back for the final speaker of the first day of iterations. And I'm really happy and thankful that we can present Tiga Brain. Hello.
Hi.
Hey. I'll briefly introduce you and then you can take it away. So Tiga Brain is an Australian-born artist and environmental engineer whose work examines issues of ecology, data systems, and infrastructure. Tiga has created wireless networks that are coupled to natural phenomena, systems for obfuscating personal data, and an online smell-based dating service. And other than that, when we are talking about creative coding, I always wave this book. Its book is called Code as Creative Medium, and she wrote it together with Golan Levin. So I'm super happy that you're here. Thanks. Take it away.
Hi, everyone. It's wonderful to be here. I'm sad not to be there in person, but it's really nice to be able to join virtually anyway. I hope you can all hear me okay. As you can see, I'm in one of my collaborator studios today, Sam Levine, who I'll be sharing some work that we've both done collaboratively together. So I'm just going to set up. So let me just share my screen. Okay, can you see my screen there? I hope so. Fabulous. All right. So thank you for the kind introduction. I am an artist and I'm also a professor of integrated digital media at NYU. And today I'm going to talk to you about my talk is divided into two parts. The first, I'm going to talk about my book project with Golan Levin, the book that has just been mentioned, Code as Creative Medium. And then in the last half of the talk, I'm going to show some of my artistic work that is putting software and code to work in various ways. And so Code as Creative Medium, we published this book in 2020, I think it was 2020. Time flies with the pandemic. And this text really is looking at the way that code and computation can be taught and learnt about in art and design. So, there's been a basic problem. For about 50 years, computer science has held a monopoly on designing programming education. But artists and designers learn differently than STEM students. And they often don't do well in traditional computer science courses. So Leah Beakley has observed this, and she observes that artists and designers are accustomed to learn through concrete examples rather than by studying abstract principles, working in ways that are improvisational rather than planned, and creating things that are expressive, experimental, rather than utilitarian. So our book really sought to address this gap in the literature and be a resource for how to teach code through the arts. It began when Golan and I were attending the I/O Festival in 2013. So we worked on it for a long time. Books take a long time. And we were planning our syllabi for the upcoming term semesters for our creative coding classes. We were swapping assignments and projects that we were thinking of assigning to our students. And we realized we'd both assigned this project, The Clock, which is a prompt to display a novel representation of time. And we realized that there was this sort of unwritten canon of assignments that were passed down from teacher to student and prevalent among our peers. And yet these classic assignments were relatively undocumented. For anyone who's done any teaching out there, you realize that when you enter the classroom, you start thinking about, what are all the assignments I got when I was in school? Which ones resonated and stuck with me? Will I assign them to my students? So we really wanted to sort of capture some of this tradition. And so the book consists of a canon of creative coding prompts compiled from decades of our peers' syllabi. It's founded on project-based learning, and it's a playbook for educators and for students, but we really wanted to also address teaching as a practice in it. It features a collection of assignments, so larger assignments where there's no one right answer, exercises where there might be several right answers that are sort of smaller scale and get you practicing, and interviews with educators about their pedagogy and the way that they teach. It's illustrated by compelling responses, so responses that come from the field of media arts. When we looked at the way that many artists over decades had been responding to these prompts in their work. And you might also be surprised to find that there's no actual code in the book. And so we deliberately decided to not include code to avoid obsolescence, right? In the last few years, a lot of us have been using JavaScript to realize work in software. In the next 5 years, who knows what language we're going to be using. Computing obviously changes really fast. Software goes in and out of use. And so we really wanted to focus on the sort of conceptual prompts rather than the sort of technical implementation of them. That said, there is a code repository of some responses to the exercises online if you go looking for it. So why make a book for teachers and learners, but why focus on teachers? So again, there's many texts out there for students, right? There's many books full of code that shows you them, but there's actually surprisingly few resources for teachers who are trying to combine art and engineering or software in a syllabus and navigate between the two. And yet so many of us teach, right? So many of us teach to sustain our creative practices. And yet universities rarely offer specific training on how to teach. Graduates leave MFAs and PhDs and find themselves in classes full of students. And so, as I mentioned, we often reverse engineer assignments and classes that stuck with us. And so we had this person in mind when we were doing this project, someone who has just come out of a degree program and is teaching for the first time and trying to figure out, like what makes a good assignment? What's a good prompt? How do you navigate how narrow or broad to make it? And we did take a lot of inspiration from some other compendiums of assignments out there, and I really recommend these texts. They're just magical and so useful if you are doing any teaching or planning to. Draw it with your eyes closed. The Art of the Art assignment was a real inspiration for us. By Petrovic and White. It was published in 2012. And it consists of interviews with artists and educators, asking them the question, what was your favorite art assignment? What is your favorite art assignment? And discussing the rise of publications around art pedagogy, they say, what disorientated us was how little attention was paid to the nuts and bolts of teaching, the effectiveness and applicability of certain classroom strategies, coping with mechanisms for the psychological toll of being a diligent instructor, ways to teach a subject that resists straightforward explication. What we realized we wanted was a book of assignments. So this is a quote from their introduction. And they identify that same blind spot that really motivated us. The other text up here on the page is a wonderful book called Taking a Line for a Walk, and it's another text full of design assignments that we really drew from as well. A couple of other examples here. Wicked Art Assignments, really fabulous book. Similarly, rather than focusing on design, this one focuses on art as well. Grapefruit is another great example. These are prompts for drawings from Yoko Ono. Teaching for people who prefer not to teach, these are all fantastic books that we really took inspiration from. Another thing that became clear in this project is that unlike works of art, educational assignments are rarely considered something worth saving. So this knowledge is often not captured and recorded. And the situation with digital media is even more dire, right? Syllabi hidden behind courseware firewalls, in university courseware, but even more detrimental to the field. Favorite projects disappear from the web, victims of bit rot. I think anybody who has looked at internet art, you return after a year and links are dead, URLs are gone, 404s everywhere. So this is a big deal for our field as these important works disappear year to year from the internet. And so we also approached this project of archiving some important and useful examples from our field. And so for this reason, we sort of have tried to capture some of these works in images as well. Quote, you're looking at the slide here. So notable works of art are discussed in critical text and collected by museums, we know this. But by contrast, assignments are not. So this is another quote from Taking a Line for a Walk. The layer of language that runs alongside the process of the teaching process is often neglected. Words fly out of teachers' or students' mouths and disappear into the air. Instructions, specifications, corrections, questions fuse with practical work. And assignments, if written down at all, are rarely considered worth saving. And so the book is also very focused on this question of how do you teach not just the technical part of creative coding, but what's worth making and why? well, how do you sort of get down to interesting concepts and ways to think? And so we really focused on this as well through the crafting of these assignment prompts. And each prompt is accompanied by work. There's about 24 of them. So you see an example on the screen, an assignment for the face generator. And we took these, you know, from a large process of research, looking at resources like open processing and other people's syllabi. Each assignment has learning objectives, variations, and this section called Making It Meaningful, which is this question of like, how is this meaningful? How does it connect to arts, history, and culture? And so each is illustrated by this collection of projects from a diverse group of practitioners. In the case of this face generator assignment, we see data visualization projects like the classic 1970 Chernoff faces, or Heather Dewey Hagborg's 3D prints from DNA, through to more expressive projects like Kate Compton's cartoon face generator, which is the colourful one on the top right there, or Carolyn Sebecker's interactive animal puppet, where you can try to control an animal face with your own face. Another example, data self-portrait, so looking at the way that data sets are collected. And we also, you know, the projects we accompanied these assignments with, not every project is famous. We also chose, you know, exemplary student work in place of some very well-known or masterful art pieces. And we did this because we chose projects based on their pedagogical value. We looked at compelling projects that were easy to explain and that demonstrated a range of conceptual concerns and approaches to media. So data self-portrait, students are asked to make a visualization that presents insights from a data set about yourself. So that you might use a pre-existing data set, or you might collect or build a system that lets you collect a new one. And so really thinking about visualization and, you know, the specificity of data. Some examples here are Georgia Lupi and Stephanie Krozovac's masterful work called Dear Data. And so this is the image you see on the top left there, and these are postcards that they drew and sent to each other every month for a year that documents different aspects of their life in data. Another example, sort of diagonal in the middle with the letters on that, the letters SMTW. That is a work, an under-attended work by Sonia Rappaport. It's called Biorhythm. And it's a work from 1981 where she used a commercial kit to predict her daily biorhythm. So this is a work that kind of anticipated the quantified self and the use of computation to quantify the self. Another example that I want you to keep in your mind, because I'm going to come back to this one, is the assignment called BOT, which is the prompt to create an autonomous artistic agent. And some of the works here, I'm sure you probably recognize some of these. Everest Pipkin's moth generator is this beautiful Twitter bot that periodically generates these synthetic but gorgeous moths in the style of sort of a natural history collection. Or Darius Kazemi's reverse OCR, that is a sort of drawing bot that is fed through an optical character recognition software. And every time the bot actually draws something that is recognized as letters in the OCR system, that is then posted. So it's sort of like a reverse optical character recognition bot. There are also assignments that move out into the physical world, and so these would be more suitable for a physical computing class. For example, a prompt to create a personal prosthetic. What would it mean to extend the body with arms or legs or extra organs, or etc. Accompanying these larger assignments, as I mentioned, there's small exercises. So these really are quite varied. One of my favorite sections, Computing Without a Computer, are prompts to think computationally in like physical and social exercises. So really great for sort of first day of class. But there are also exercises that deal with sort of more standard creative coding topics like iteration, visualization, so like prompts for practicing different but classic visualization approaches. exercises around text and typography. And finally, there's also some sections on the provenance or the history of some of these assignments. So where did they come from? Where did we first find versions of these? And so this is a history that really stretches back to the beginning of computation. We found dug out assignments that, you know, folks were giving in the 90s, before creative computing was really a wider spread practice in universities. The final section of the book is interviews with educators that we really admire. So you can see there's a fabulous group of people here, and we ask them things like, you know, what's the most memorable assignment you've given? Or questions that might resonate with the educators in the room. What happens on your worst day of teaching? Like, what do you do when things go wrong? You know, and I think these sorts of conversations are really valuable. And this is actually one of my favorite parts of the book, because, you know, teaching otherwise ends up being often a pretty private practice. You know, we don't often observe each other teach, and it's really wonderful to sort of hear people's tricks and experiences for what they're doing in the classroom. And one of our interviewees, Tae-Yoon Choi, who is founder of School for Poetic Computation and who has been a great mentor and friend of mine, I loved his response to this question we asked everyone of how do you encourage meaning making, criticality, perspective, and heart in a sort of technological education. And so I'm going to read you his quote, and he says, you know, it's easy to retreat into this mode of like, we're going to help you become a great coder, we're going to help you become an expert. But to me, this sounds as thin as we're going to help you become good at Photoshop. I think the real question is about finding a desire within students to master the language of technology. It's code, electronics, and all that, but it's really about expression and expressive literacy. I want them to approach code and technology as a medium, as an artistic medium, so they can not only overcome the psychological barrier of I can't do this, or it's not working, or it's not for me, but can be creative with the medium. I like to give examples that are as simple as one button, one output, like pressing a button that lights up an LED. And from there, I like to show you can make a lot of meaning with very little technology. And this really spoke to me. So finally, before I move on to the second part of the talk, I just want to end with this tweet, which observes, you know, that our understanding of what computational work has looked like has become limited because of the history of computing has been dominated by figures in STEM fields. But other figures and other stories belong to this history too. And so that's what we've really tried to capture, that there has always been art and design engagement with computing, and it's a really important way of teaching these tools and technologies. And I thought this tweet is by Whitney Sparaza, and she captures that really well. So tools and pedagogy are really important parts of my own practice, but also really important things that we touched on in the book as well. Educators in creative coding are doing a lot to extend the field and building open source toolkits and libraries. So P5JS, of course, very important. We do a lot of teaching in this environment. But other tools like Bazel.js, this is an environment that lets you automate InDesign. And we actually used this tool to automatically lay out the whole of our book project. So it lets you script InDesign and you produce layouts computationally. So really fantastic tool for designers. There's other libraries out there like PEmbroiderer. This is one from Golem Levin, who's my co-author. And this is a library that speaks to an embroidery machine. So it lets you use computational processes to generate embroidery. It's amazing. One of my own, P5Reso, a collaboration with Sam Levine. This is a P5 library that helps you prepare files for risograph printing, which is sort of like a screen printing process using the machine you see on screen. And it means you print in separate layers of color, you know, think like screen printing, but it also lets you use computational and software-based approaches and then output the files that you would print on a printer. And finally, another tool that I'm going to come back to in a second, VideoGrep by Sam Levine. This is a Python-based tool and super useful for video editing, again, using the terminal. So it's like a command line tool. And it allows you to edit video based on dialogue, right? And so it's really great for doing things like generating supercuts. And so this is the example video Sam prepared that shows you how to use the library, and this, you know, is a supercut from Mark Zuckerberg. Experiences. Okay, that's enough. But that's every time he says experience in the launch video for Meta. A fantastic resource for some of these tools and libraries that have been important in my own practice is this website called tinytools.directory. It was prepared and maintained by Everest Pipkin, so thank you, Everest. It's a super useful resource for looking at what little tools for creative process are out there, and so I highly recommend taking a look at it. Okay, in the time I have left, I now want to just share a couple of recent works that put to use some of these environments and tools that I've been talking about. And these projects sort of fall under an umbrella term called expanded geoengineering. So they are works mostly done in collaboration with Sam Levine. And they are works that address the climate crisis and environment and the role of technology in it. So to start with, this is a work from 2015. And it's a work that responds to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. You might be familiar with this. It's a UN body that basically develops policy for how we're going to climate crisis. And so we looked at the IPCC and we decided, well, I think they're overlooking something in the way that climate change is being discussed. And so we wanted to take their model of like how to have an international organization, and we tweaked it. We made one small difference to their model, which is we did a simple find and replace, and we took out the word climate change from all their online materials, and we replaced it with the word capitalism, because we thought that, you know, there wasn't enough discussion of the underlying economic situation that's driving the climate crisis. So we transformed all of their documents, all of their PDFs, all of their video, everything we could find online into an equally truthful corpus of materials about capitalism. And the wonderful thing is, if you change the phrase climate change with the word capitalism, fortunately all the grammar remains completely intact, or even perhaps enhanced. So we took all of their videos,
the World Meteorological Organization
and also did the edit.
And the United Nations Environment Programme had the foresight to recognize that the emerging issue of capitalism would soon rise to the top of the global agenda. By jointly establishing an intergovernmental panel on capitalism, the governing bodies of WMO and UNEP ensured that future decision-making about capitalism would be based on sound science.
The poorest people in the world who are going to be most severely hurt by
capitalism.
What it is saying is that
capitalism
is a transaction in which some people harm other people.
Substantial and wide-ranging impacts of
capitalism
have occurred across the world.
Capitalism
is already affecting ecosystems, human health.
We have the means to limit
capitalism
and build a better future.
The impacts of capitalism will become progressively more difficult and beyond the scope of our being able to adapt to them. Action has to be taken now.
Right? All of that really holds true. And so think back, I mentioned Sam Levine's VideoGrep tool, a command line tool that lets you edit video based on dialogue. And so we used this tool to transform all of the IP institution. And that voice you hear saying capitalism is taken from the Piketty audiobook of Capital, that important book from economics that was published a few years ago. And so really it let us, using these tools, it let us sort of like create this kind of speculative imagined organization that was dealing with the climate crisis as an economic crisis, a crisis of our economic systems. We did the find and replace on all of the IPCC reports and on their website. And you can watch the video archive there. And so within this framework, we really started thinking about, you know, what is missing in the discussion around how we're going to respond to climate change? And we really thought, you know, we want to make work about this idea of expanded geoengineering. So we talk about these projects under this umbrella, the division of expanded geoengineering. So geoengineering is a broad term that refers to large-scale and still mostly speculative attempts to manage Earth's climate, either by carbon dioxide removal or attempts to reduce heating. So there are proposals out there like, obviously, good things like tree planting and ecosystem restoration, but much more outlandish things like, you know, solar radiation management, where we put particles in the sky and limit the amount of sun coming through. It's all very much at the research stage. This stuff is mostly speculative. However, you know, we're in a bad shape with climate. We do need planetary infrastructures. But at the IPC, we started to think that a lot of these proposals just seem to be these straightforward attempts to try to manipulate the physical world, and they don't address the climate crisis as a crisis of culture, of economics, and of our social lives. So we really wanted to start thinking about what engineering could look like beyond just technological solutions. How might we think about things like media, or how much we work and rest in this conversation? So to give you an example, let's first consider the media. So the current business model of the internet relies on digital advertising and engagement metrics. So this means physical manifestations of engagement, like crowds or gatherings, online have become clicks, likes, shares that all equate to ad revenue. And so at the IPC, we want to ask, you know, how does this media landscape play out in the climate emergency? So climate change and its devastating effects are here now, and yet I still think these issues are not getting the media attention they deserve. You know, regularly climate change doesn't even make headlines, and often it's still not described as human-induced. So often you see these climate disasters still being described as natural disasters. And so the business model of the internet means many news outlets rely on revenue by selling ads alongside their stories. The more traffic a story receives, the more money it earns, and there's this incentive to optimize coverage in journalism for clicks and views that are assumed to indicate engagement and the online crowd. Engagement data then also determines how stories are aggregated and amplified, and this often happens without humans in the loop. URL pings, mouse clicks, scrolls, they all determine the value of news. Crowds, whether gathered in protest to support, however, are central to democratic process, right? And however, when political leaders pay people to attend rallies by hiring actors, we're reminded that engagement can be coerced or simulated, a fact that's become even more pronounced on the internet. So opinions about climate change are increasingly curated and co-engineered by algorithms of today's digital media platforms. And so we're arguing in this project that we could think about the media as a space for potential climate engineering. So if you can influence the media cycle, you can influence the carbon cycle. The fossil fuel industry has known this for a long time. There's lots of writing on their efforts to sort of manipulate narratives around climate change. For example, BP's promotion of the individualized carbon footprint that really puts responsibility on individuals rather than corporations, very problematic. But they launched this in 2004, so many, many years ago. And we also see media manipulation more widely. So for example, in the Australian fires, there were lots of bots saying that these fires were because of arson rather than climate change. Just gonna skip over these slides. And so in response to this, we created a work called Synthetic Messenger. And this is a botnet. So you could see it as a response to the bot assignment, really, that I mentioned before. And it examines this problem, this role of automated media platforms in the climate response. So the botnet consists of 100 bots. Each is animated with a hand and a recorded voice. And they spend their days going around the internet visiting climate stories, so climate coverage, and then they click on all the ads that run alongside them, so you can see the bot busy on the screen doing that. And so each click would mean a little transaction goes from advertiser to news outlet and potentially increases the value of this type of news coverage. So we're really trying to explore the advertising business model of the internet to draw attention and ask questions of the role that this is playing in how we understand the environment and the climate crisis. We originally created the work on Zoom. It was a pandemic project. And so it was presented in this Zoom call. It's a very weird Zoom call where hundreds of the bots would join the call and describe their activities.
Click. Scroll. Click.
Scroll. Click. Roll.
Click. Roll. Click. Click. Scroll. Click. Click. Scroll. Click.
Scroll.
Click. Scroll. Click. Scroll.
Okay, I don't know if that's giving anyone PTSD from all the Zoom calls over the pandemic, but it ran for 2 weeks, and in that time our bots visited over 2 million sites and clicked on over 6 million ads. You can look at the dashboard. The website is up with some of these stats. And so yeah, this project really is a provocation to think about the role of media in the climate conversation and the way that it influences our ecology. All right, I'm going to speed through one final project because I want to leave a little bit of time for questions. But this final project I'll share extends this question, right, of how might we address the environment crisis from a more holistic perspective. And this project is looking at production, right? Looking at what conventional ideas around rest and work. So in many ways, the goal of traditional geoengineering seeks to maintain the status quo, to ensure that power relations, wealth relations, class relations remain as they are, and to ensure that production continues on this path of growth that has got us into this crisis. So the second project in this sort of expanded geoengineering series is a project called Perfect Sleep. And it investigates sleep and dreaming as a potential climate engineering technology. So in the work, we invite participants to experiment with their own sleep cycles to explore how lack of sleep and climate change are both products of the same extractive capitalist system, where regeneration, rest, and natural limits go unvalued. And so the work consists of an installation and an app. You can download the app from the App Store. There's also a download for Android on the site. And it's basically, the app is a phone alarm clock app. And it allows the user to adjust their sleep schedule. It slowly increases your sleep time over the course of 3 years until you reach a state of total sleep or perfect sleep, which is 24 hours. And so you can see that, yeah, some of the screens up on the slide. So as your sleep time increases, the app suggests an appropriate schedule, driving up your remaining time into leisure and work. Dividing up the remaining time into leisure and work. So sleep goes up, leisure and work goes down. Of course, being able to work less is a privilege that many of us don't have. And so we really wanted to ask this question of what would it take to enable us to collectively rest more? We also initially wanted to make the app like $10,000, so only the right people would be able to use it. But the curator wouldn't let us, so it's actually free. But here's a potential schedule. So maybe you can see on day 613, you're sleeping for 16 hours, 42 minutes, and enjoying 7 hours, 18 minutes of leisure, and working for 0 hours and 0 minutes. Perfect, huh? And by day 1051, you've achieved total sleep. So the app also tracks your estimated economic output and carbon emissions as your sleep time increases and your work increases. And to make these predictions, we produced a very sophisticated climate model. No, I'm being sarcastic, it's very simple. But we did make a good faith attempt on modeling this by drawing on research that correlates average sleep time and GDP with carbon emissions. So for example, some estimations for what happens to GDP and CO2 relative to sleep time. So sleep here is on the x-axis. And you can see that like on that graph on the left, there's an interesting little glitch there where like for the first little bit, as you start sleeping more, you can see that your productivity goes up a little bit, right? So your CO2 emissions, that purple line goes up a little bit, and the green line, which is GDP, also goes up a little bit. And that's because sleep researchers have found that, you know, most people are a little bit underslept. And so if we actually slept a little bit more, our productivity and our GDP and our emissions would go up a little bit more. So this is obviously not what we want. And so luckily the curve starts going in the right direction after that 8 hours is hit, and then your productivity starts going down, which is what we want. Of course, you know, the App Store is already filled with sleeping and resting apps. Silicon Valley has a deep interest in rest, but of course it's an interest in rest and wellness for the sake of increasing productivity rather than decreasing it. So instead, you'll notice in our model, we're interested in sleep as asking questions about productivity and not just increasing it for the sake of more output, basically. Okay, so the installation of the work, you can see, consists of these day beds, this reclining furniture, so you can kind of lie back and experience some dream incubations, which are also in the app. So we commissioned a series of authors who we love, Simone Brown, Johanna Hedvar, Holly Jean Buck, and Sophie Lewis, to create dream incubation texts. So texts envisaging a world beyond our own. And then these texts were transformed into dreamscapes by amazing composer Luisa Pereira. And so you can listen to them in the app, or you can lie in these day beds and drift off. So I'm going to leave it there. Thank you so much for your time and attention. And I think we have a few minutes left for questions.
Thank you, Tiga. Little applause, yeah. Are there any questions in the room already? Online? I have to check my phone. I do have one question going back to the first part of the talk. I think it's really nice that you made this book and about code as a creative medium without including any code. We also provide a lot of workshops and basically try to inspire teachers and students. And often when you mention the word code, people get a bit scared. And well, anyway, so making a book and more accessible is super nice. But one thing that we struggle with is if we want to reach out to the educators, they hardly have any time to learn something new because the curriculum is super full. What's your experience with that and the publishing the book?
I guess what level of educator are you talking about? Because I mean, this book is sort of focused, as I mentioned, on higher ed. And I don't know, again, increasingly in the US system, what I'm finding is that my undergrad students are actually coming in with some mostly Python abilities already, so that, and again, this might be a US thing, but that coding is increasingly being introduced in high school level. So which is also interesting because that means like what does that mean for what we do at a higher ed level? But I don't think I'm answering your question.
No, yeah, but yeah, indeed, it's specific to different target audiences and teachers yeah, it's true.
But I mean, I also think there's really rich potential to integrate it into a lot of disciplines, right? Like, for me, I think there's a lot of potential through like physics simulations to think about how, you know, how could physics education become a little bit more applied? Like, if you're applying gravity and so forth in your programming, it like really becomes tangible in a way that often science is left to be taught in a very theoretical way. I think we could think of also examples of sort of more digital humanities applications, right? So I showed a little bit of the video grep work that Sam's doing. And I think there's increasingly really interesting, rich, you know, computational text work that could be sort of integrated into sort of more humanities classes as well.
Yeah, thanks. Let me see if there are any other questions coming in. No questions here. Okay, so I've got one question. The book Code as a Creative Medium is so generous in its examples. How did you go about structuring your examples?
How do we go about choosing them? Is that the question?
And structuring.
Oh, structuring. Well, a lot of giant spreadsheets. So the book really did take a lot of research. Golan and one of his students did a big deep dive and web scrape of open processing, which is a really rich repository of syllabi and collections that educators and their classes have produced. And so we did a really big sort of scan of websites like that to look at, you know, what examples, what assignments are people giving. And then in terms of collecting all of the art examples, I mean, we structured them, I think I mentioned this, but so with each assignment, we tried to include a few examples from established artists, right? Like sort of what we called aspirational examples, you know, artwork where you're like, oh, it shows real like skill and competence and, you know, work that someone who has a lot of experience is able to produce. So we tried to include some of those because I think, you know, they're great for getting really excited and seeing sort of how far an could be taken. But then we also tried to include, as I mentioned, some examples from our own students or student work we found online, really great examples, but that may not be so like technically complicated as a way of also just demonstrating how the assignment prompt could be responded to in, you know, maybe not such a technically advanced way or a way that's a bit more accessible for a beginner or a learner.
Okay, thanks. Your project really successfully combined urgency with a pinch of humor. How do you come up with a concept for an installation or artwork from a news event? What's the process?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's often a slow process, right? So often I make, particularly the more environment work that I showed, often I make projects that respond to something that annoys me, right? Like, you know, a lot of the way that the climate crisis is framed as a sort of technological challenge, you know, where we're going to make all these crazy machines to pull like carbon out of the air, when really like maybe we could give everybody a minimum wage and we could all work 3 days a week, right? Like that would be easier than making a giant carbon sucking machine, probably. And so I often am making these works because I'm annoyed by the discourse around a particular issue. And humor, yeah, is really important because I think particularly with the climate thing, you can feel very overwhelmed, it can feel insurmountable, it can also feel very, like, unfortunately, very doomy, where you feel like it's, you know, that it's impossible to address. And so I think trying to approach it from a sort of humorous, provocative, but also kind of amateurish way can be really invigorating and an invitation to think and engage with it in a new way. There's a great artist, Claire Pentecost, who's based here in the US, and she describes a lot of these kinds of practices we're talking about as artist as public amateur, where you're someone who agrees to go out and learn about a topic that you're not an expert in, but in public, and you're going to share your learning process in public, and you're going to sort of go down that path and invite people in along the way into your research. And so I think we definitely take that approach. And for example, for the Sleep Project, right? We wrote up that proposal. I pitched it to like a few exhibitions, gets rejected a number of times. It sits in your hard drive for a few years. We called up a few sleep scientists and we interviewed them and were like super interested in sleep. Do some literature reviews, eventually found a venue that was interested, tried to talk to some climate scientists about like, how would you model something like sleep and GDP and carbon? So it's really is this process of sort of trying to understand a field, but in a way that's accessible, I think. I don't know if that answers your question, but I think also like collaboration's a really important part of my practice. As you've seen, the projects I showed were a collaboration with Sam Levine. And so that's, particularly also when I was starting out, was really important because, software-based work is complicated and there's a lot of different skills you need. And so I think collaboration can be really generative, where you can work with someone who maybe has a different skill set to you and be in dialogue and sort of develop it through your conversations.
Yeah, indeed. I think. Okay, yeah. I think it's really nice. I think it's also very specific to the practice of creative coding, so to say, to share your process and to collaborate. Could you tell us a bit more about those collaborations and how basically also that process lets you reflect on yourself?
I think everybody works differently, but I think also, so for me, I love being in dialogue with people, and I think my work is often richer if I can be. That's not the case for everybody, right? But that said, even a lot of folks in our field who maybe publish work just under their name, often they are actually collaborations in the background. And if you go and like do a deep dive and look at the credits, you'll see that, the project, somebody was doing the machine learning piece of it, or somebody else did the interaction design piece of it. Again, because you're bringing together so many different skill sets. And if one does this sort of work in a sort of corporate setting, right? If you're making websites or apps or whatever, these would be teams of like half a dozen people working on these projects. So I think collaboration is really inherent, whether it's made super explicit or not. For me, I guess one thing I didn't mention is my background is also, I did an undergraduate degree in environmental engineering. So for me, a lot of the environmental work that I have been doing over the last series of years is also addressing that field and what it means to try to design environments or work with them. So the collaborative work that I showed with Sam, so Sleep Study and Synthetic Messenger, is really a marrying of our interests and skills, in that I'm very interested in climate and environment stuff. He's an amazing web developer and does a lot of what's called web scraping. So this is using software to that goes out on the internet and scrapes different parts of websites for the web content. And it's a really important method in machine learning. It's how like big image databases like ImageNet were created, by web scraping Flickr and open image websites. And so, so you can see in some of those works, so Synthetic Messenger is basically a web scraping project, because those bots are like scraping the web for, like going to all the news websites and looking for content that's got the word climate change or global warming, and we have a whole list of these words there in the articles, and then the bots are simulating being a human, going around clicking on everything. So yeah, I think, you know, you can sort of see the way that we're bringing different things to a project like that.
And what and in developing that concept around that project, what came first, like the scraping or the concept of applying it into the newspaper articles?
Well, I was looking into a lot of media manipulation research, and so we were thinking about, oh, you know, could we? And I've done previous work like looking at targeted advertising. So for example, I did a project a few years ago called Bushwick Analytica, and it was basically a series of workshops with kids, like 8, 9-year-olds, and I got them to develop their own targeted ad campaigns for them to be able to like target their parents with like targeted ads and things like that. So we'd been looking at targeted ads for a long time, and basically also how opaque those systems are. So they're really, you know, everyone asks with the Synthetic Messenger work, oh, how much do you get for clicking an ad? And it's really hard to find that information, because just the way these systems are automated. And so I guess it's building off that work, but also like, it's also in response to some other projects in the field. So there was a project called Ad Nauseam that was published probably about 10 years ago now by Daniel Howe, Helen Nissenbaum, and Mushon Zeraviv. And that was a browser add-on that would actually, every web page you went to would click on every ad on that web page in order to obfuscate your browsing data and basically just, you know, throw a bunch of sand in the cogs of digital advertising as a process. You know, so it's using obfuscation. And so, you know, we were thinking of like, you know, doing research. Who else in the field is doing things with ads, doing interventions with ads, and through that process, you know, as I mentioned, it did take, we wrote up the proposal and sort of iterated on it for, I don't know, 18 months, 2 years, something, before we actually made the thing. So it's also slow.
Yeah. Can you also tell us a bit more about the balance between the pedagogy and your self-initiated work? In what way does teaching influence your own work?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think teaching can be an opportunity to push your own practice in different directions. In that, like, for example, the P5 RISO library that I mentioned, the RISO graph printing library, we made that a couple of years ago, but I just taught a class with it this semester. And in doing that, right, you see it in the hands of like 30 of your students, and you find all the bugs, and, you know, if you want to see how software breaks, like, give it to a group of 20 people and let them use it, you know. So that's one way. I think it lets you sort of incubate different ways of working. Yeah, and I don't know, I also then, so that's a more production class, but sometimes I also teach classes on these questions of environment and technology, where it's sort of like half reading and research in these issues, and then we do sort of small scale technical or software-based experiments, you know, collecting different data sets or trying to see how environments are represented online. So I do try to use my teaching as a way of sort of pushing my practice, or taking research that I've done from my practice and then sort of translating it into projects or exercises or prompts in the classroom. It's not always easy, right? Like, I think often we speak about that kind of overlap very, like, idealistically. It can be challenging because, you know, you have to translate a body of research you've been doing for a long time. into something scaffolded in a way that students can actually understand and find a way in. So I think that can actually be quite challenging.
Yeah. Thanks. Yeah, I got another quote in from, or quote, another question from the online audience. We really love the quote you mentioned in the book of Taeyeon Choi, comparing teaching code to teaching Photoshop and emphasizing it should be more about creating a desire to learn. Did you experience this when learning code yourself?
It cut out a little bit. So would you mind just repeating the question quickly? I'm sorry.
So basically, referring back to the quote of Taeyeon Choi, the emphasis of the desire to learn during the process of learning how to code. Did you experience that when learning coding yourself?
Yeah, definitely. I think Taeyeon makes a really great point where it's not just about learning the tool, right? It's about thinking of it as a medium, thinking about its qualities, thinking about where it breaks, where it can be bent, where it can be pushed. For me, in my own learning process, I think this is the case, again, in a lot of software-based practices, every project you're learning something new, right? And I think that's the beauty of project-based learning as well, where like you've got this sort of concept or this thing you want to pursue, you get really obsessed with targeted ads or whatever, just to continue the ad thing. And then you start to, and it gives you this motivation to start to maybe learn a new tool or learn a new approach or try a different approach out, right? So I think that's really motivating, particularly for art and designers. I think there's also the question that's coming up that maybe I don't have a good answer to right now, but like, as our AI tools are getting better and better, it's increasingly getting easier to generate code to responses, right?
Yeah.
So I think just the idea that you can write a program to, explore randomness or whatever, it's not enough, and it's more about, I think as educators, it's about cultivating a student's curiosity and modeling to them how an art practice looks like and what it means to pursue an idea through various iterations and maybe in different environments, rather than just sort of responding to a prompt and it's done, right?
Yeah. Yeah, indeed. I also wrote down the notion about expressive literacy related to the prompting, the text to image, the DALL-E 2 experiments recently. And I think it's quite interesting indeed what you say, like, I think now it becomes easier to get a quick result, but it's not enough, right? if you want to stimulate expressive literacy. Can you
I agree, it's not enough. But I mean, in some ways, like, this situation's already been around for a long time, in that, like, anyone who's taught, you can tell some students have gone onto Stack Overflow and just found a response and tried to implement it, right? And there's obviously, like, all of the open source, like open processing or whatever, has a huge amount of code available that, can be applied, which is fine, right? That's how we all learn. I reuse people's code all the time in projects, we all do. So I don't necessarily think that's a problem, but I think it means, again, as I mentioned, that a big part of is, how do you come up with a good question? How do you push a concept? How do you maybe try to explore it in the physical world and in software to kind of try and make it a bit richer, right? Like, what does it mean to sort of engage with with concepts that are so important in software, like time, like data, like what does it mean to quantify the world, like, you know, how do you write procedural, what does it mean to work in a procedural way, or using protocol, or right? So these are really interesting, rich conceptual prompts that I think can be explored in a number of ways, right? That aren't just software based. So I think it's about, yeah, like, and this was very much the goal of the book too. We talk about this in the introduction, cultivating this sort of arts literacy, right? So how do you think as an artist? How do you approach a question or a concept as an artist, and not just, you know, I mean, we can think of these GTP3 and these AI tools also as kind of like advanced search engines, right? Where you give it a prompt and it gives you a quick answer, but it doesn't mean much, you know, it doesn't come with meaning.
Thanks. I think we have to wrap up. Is there one last question here in the room? Yeah, I still have one more question, but I'm not sure if I should I do it. Anyway, I think it was really. I will pose the last question just to finish off. I think it was really interesting that you were looking at the computational, creative, artistic practices, and then look back at art history, at how these things has been documented or not documented. And I was wondering, going to your second part of the talk about the ecological geoengineering work, did you also look into the history of the art history of artists addressing these kind of issues and also trying to intervene in the cycle, the economy? I was just wondering.
I mean, there's obviously a long-running interest in non-use, I guess, or pushing back on productivity and progress. We weren't really responding to a particular artist or inquiry from art history, but now that you're mentioning that would be a great thing to pursue, right?
Yeah. Yeah, sorry, my background is art historian.
Let's talk. I would talk about this more. Yeah, the work's all pretty recent, so just thinking about contextualizing it or writing would be a nice thing to do this.
Okay, so the stream is freezing. Maybe it's a cue.
It's the environment.
Yeah. Well, okay, let's finish it here. Thanks a lot, Tiga. Thanks for your interesting talk and perspectives. I think, there's a lot potential there to build up on. So thank you, and give her applause, please. Okay.
Thank you so much. It's lovely to be a part of this.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it.
So this is the end of day one of iterations. Tomorrow we have 3 more talks starting at the same time. Sorry, I'm in blackout. Thanks a lot for coming, and I hope to see you all tomorrow again. Tonight we have a movie night starting at 8:30. After this, so if you're in the neighborhood, if you're around, you can visit. We also have an exhibition happening outside with a few works definitely worthwhile seeing. So if you're around, please drop by. You're welcome. Thanks, and see you all tomorrow.